The delivery room was supposed to be a place of joy, filled with the usual sounds of a newborn's first cries and whispered promises of a bright future. But as Emma looked down at the two babies in her arms, one with her porcelain skin and blonde curls, the other with a deep brown complexion, she felt the room turn cold. She searched her husband David's eyes, hoping for reassurance, but found only confusion and a silent, heavy question hanging in the air. What happened? The nurse's voice had cracked slightly as she handed the twins to Emma, a smile that had quickly faded into a perplexed expression. The doctor had reassured Emma that the babies were healthy, but that wasn't what anyone in the room was concerned about. Before we dive into this fascinating story, please share a comment with the community, letting us know where you're watching from. Rumors spread quickly in their small town, where everybody seemed to know everyone else's business. The twins were a curiosity that brought out the worst of people's assumptions. The whispers followed them from the grocery store to church, like a stubborn shadow Emma could not shake. Did you hear? David's wife must have had an affair. The words cut like knives, and though David tried to pretend he didn't hear them, Emma could see how they twisted inside him, chipping away at his trust. Every night, David grew quieter, slipping into the kind of silence that wrapped itself around him like armor. Emma knew she hadn't been unfaithful, but how could she convince David when he barely looked at her anymore? She wished she could shout out the truth, but there was no simple explanation. The doubt lodged in David's heart seemed to take root, and soon they were sleeping on opposite sides of a wall that no words could break through. Despite the tension between their parents, Chloe and Kai shared a bond that was unbreakable. Chloe, with her soft blonde curls, would hold Kai's tiny hand in hers, and they would toddle around the house like they were on their own grand adventure. As toddlers, they had their own language, a series of giggles and gestures that only they understood. Emma found comfort in their laughter, the way Chloe always stood up for her brother, even when they were too young to understand what standing up meant. When Kai became the target of curious, sometimes cruel comments from strangers, Chloe would look them straight in the eyes and say, "This is my brother, and he's perfect." There was an innocence in their connection that Emma clung to, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be right again. The first sign that Kai understood his difference came when he was 4. He had been playing with Chloe at the park, chasing her around the swings, when a little boy pointed at him and said, "Why is he dirty?" Kai had looked down at his hands, scrubbing them with a confused expression. Emma's heart broke as she ran over, kneeling down beside him to whisper, "You're not dirty, sweetheart. You're perfect just the way you are." Chloe, indignant, stomped her foot and shouted at the boy, "He's not dirty. He's my brother." But Emma could see the uncertainty in Kai's eyes, a question she knew she'd eventually have to answer. David's distance grew as the twins grew older. He watched from the sidelines, his eyes clouded with questions he never asked aloud. Emma could see it in the way he hesitated before holding Kai, the way his smile faltered when Kai called him "Daddy." It was as if David was searching for something, some sign that Kai was his, that there was no deception. It wasn't just the rumors from the town, it was a battle within himself, a question of whether he could truly accept what he did not understand. One evening, David came home late, the smell of whiskey on his breath. He stood in the doorway, looking at Emma as if he were a stranger in his own home. "Emma," he started, his voice cracking, I need to know the truth." His words were like a blade, cutting through the little bit of hope Emma had been holding on to. "You want a test?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You want me to prove that I love you, that I never betrayed you?" David looked down, his silence more painful than any accusation. The next day, Emma decided that if David wasn't going to fight for their family, she would. She took the twins to her mother's house, needing the comfort of someone who believed her without question. Her mother, an older woman with kind eyes, had always told Emma that family was worth fighting for, no matter the odds. As the twins played in the garden, her mother pulled Emma aside. "You need to find out what's really going on," she said. "If there's something hidden in our past, it's time we brought it to light." That evening, Emma went through the old family chest her mother kept in the attic, a collection of photographs, letters, and mementos from generations past. She found a faded photograph of a woman she'd seen before in stories, her great-grandmother. In the woman's arms was a child with features strikingly similar to Kai's. Emma's heart raced as she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the answer they needed. She took the photograph, holding it close, a sense of purpose filling her. This was her family's story, and she would use it to fight for the love she knew was real. Emma returned home, determination in her eyes. She showed David the photograph, her voice steady as she said, "This is where Kai comes from. This is our family." David stared at the photograph, his face softening as he traced the child's features. There, in the faded image, was the truth he'd been searching for, a connection that could not be denied. He looked at Emma, tears forming in his eyes. "I've been so wrong," he whispered. Emma nodded, her heart aching, but there was hope now, hope that they could start to rebuild what had been broken. David stood by the kitchen counter, the photograph still in his hands. Emma watched him, waiting for something, anything that showed he was ready to make things right. He turned, eyes filled with regret, and said, "I want to know them. I want to know my children, Emma." His voice broke, and Emma saw a glimpse of the man she once knew, the one who held her hand during long walks and whispered that they could conquer anything together. She nodded, a small smile forming on her lips, and said, "Then let's start again." As they began to rebuild, David knew that they would have to face the community. The judgment that had once made him question his family was still out there, a shadow looming over their happiness. They decided to take the twins to the local fair, a place where everyone gathered, and whispers could either destroy or be silenced by the undeniable truth. David held Kai's hand for the first time in a long time, and the boy looked up at him, a smile lighting his face. Chloe, beside them, held Emma's hand, and together they walked into the fairground, heads held high. People stared, some with curiosity, others with judgment. David felt the weight of their eyes, but when Kai pulled on his hand and pointed at a carousel, laughing with delight, he realized that his son's joy was louder than their whispers. He picked Kai up, lifting him onto his shoulders, and the boy's laughter echoed, a sound that drowned out every bit of doubt that had once plagued David's heart. While David focused on reconnecting with the twins, Emma's determination to uncover her great-grandmother's story deepened. She returned to her mother's attic, combing through old letters. One letter caught her eye. It was written in delicate script, addressed to her great-grandmother from a man named Thomas. Emma read the words carefully, her heart pounding as she realized that this man, Thomas, was the key to Kai's heritage. The letter spoke of love, but also of heartbreak, of a relationship that was never accepted by society. Emma's great-grandmother had loved deeply, but the world around her had not been kind. Emma now knew where Kai's features came from, a love story that had been buried by time and prejudice. Emma shared her findings with David one quiet evening. She handed him the letter, her voice trembling as she said, "This is where Kai comes from." It wasn't an affair, David. It was love, a love that no one accepted back then. David read the letter, his expression softening as he began to understand. He looked at Emma, tears brimming in his eyes. "I've wasted so much time," he whispered. Emma took his hand, her own eyes wet. "Then let's not waste another moment," she replied. As David and Emma worked to heal their relationship, Chloe faced her own struggles. At school, the whispers that had once haunted their parents began to reach her ears. A group of children had cornered her during recess, asking why her brother didn't look like her. Chloe, usually confident, found herself at a loss for words. She ran home that day, tears streaming down her face. Emma held her, whispering reassurances, but Chloe's heart was heavy. "Why can't people just see that we're family?" she sobbed. Emma kissed her forehead, her own heart breaking. "Sometimes people are scared of what they don't understand, sweetheart, but we'll show them. We'll show them that love is stronger than anything." David knew he had to do something to show Chloe that they were a family, no matter what anyone said. He decided to take a stand, to show the town that he was proud of his children. He arranged a small gathering at their home, inviting neighbors and friends. It was a simple barbecue, but it was David's way of saying, "This is my family, and I love them." As people gathered, David stood up, holding Kai in his arms. "I want to thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady. "This is my son, Kai. He's a part of me, just as much as Chloe is, and I love him with all my heart." The crowd was silent, and for a moment, David feared he had made a mistake. But then, one by one, people began to clap, a few stepping forward to shake his hand to meet Kai. It was a small step, but it was enough. That night, as the last of the guests left, David sat with Kai and Chloe in the backyard. The stars were bright above them, and the air was filled with the scent of the barbecue. Kai leaned against his father, his small hand resting on David's arm. Chloe sat beside Emma, her head on her mother's shoulder. David looked at his family, a sense of peace washing over him. "I love you both," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Kai looked up, his eyes shining. "I love you too, Daddy." Chloe nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Me too." Emma knew their journey wasn't over. There would still be questions, still be people who didn't understand. But as she looked at her family, she felt a sense of resolve. They had faced the worst, and they had come out stronger. She took David's hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll face it all together," she said. David nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Together," he agreed. The next morning, Emma and David took the twins to visit her mother. They wanted to show her the photograph, to share the story they had uncovered. Her mother looked at the photograph, her eyes welling with tears. "She was brave," she whispered, "and so are you." Emma smiled, holding her mother's hand. "We're all brave," she replied. As they sat together, the sun shining down on them, Emma knew that their journey was just beginning, but it was a journey they would take together as a family.
Hey there, quick message. Grab a paper, write down HeroKind Stories, our channel name. Come back soon, we've got incredible stories you won't want to miss.
One Saturday afternoon, Kai started to feel unwell. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a slight fever, but as the hours passed, his condition worsened. Emma watched as Kai's breathing grew shallow, panic rising in her chest. She called David at work, her voice trembling. "It's Kai, David. Something's wrong. He's not breathing right." David dropped everything, racing home, his heart pounding in fear. As they rushed Kai to the hospital, David held his son in his arms, whispering, "You're going to be okay, buddy. Stay with me." The doctors admitted Kai immediately, hooking him up to machines that beeped steadily, each sound a painful reminder of his fragility. Emma stood beside David, her hand clutching his, both of them terrified. Hours passed, and the doctors finally emerged, telling them Kai had a severe allergic reaction that had triggered a dangerous respiratory response. They were able to stabilize him, but he would need careful monitoring. While Kai rested in the hospital, an unexpected visitor arrived. Thomas's granddaughter, Julia. She had learned about Emma's search through some distant family connections. Julia introduced herself, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. She handed Emma an old letter that Thomas had written but never sent. "I think this belongs to you," she said softly. Emma opened the letter, her eyes widening as she read Thomas's heartfelt words. It spoke of the struggle he had faced, wanting to be a part of his child's life, but knowing the obstacles that stood in the way. It was filled with love, regret, and hope for a future where his story would not be lost. That night, as David sat beside Kai's hospital bed, he couldn't hold it in any longer. He broke down, tears streaming down his face. He thought of all the time he had wasted, how his fears and doubts had stolen precious moments with his son. Emma sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders. "It's okay, David," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're here now. We're not losing him." David nodded, his voice breaking. "I can't lose him, Emma. I can't." His tears were raw, filled with the fear of losing a child he had just begun to truly know. Chloe, who had been silently watching her brother from the corner of the room, stepped forward. She climbed onto the hospital bed, laying her small hand on Kai's. "You're the bravest person I know, Kai," she whispered. "You're going to get better. We need you." Her voice, though young, was strong, filled with love and determination. Emma and David watched, tears in their eyes, as Chloe stayed beside her brother, her presence giving him strength. It was as if she were willing him to fight, to stay with them. Kai's condition remained critical for days. Emma and David barely left his side, taking turns resting in uncomfortable chairs in the hospital room. One night, as David sat by Kai's side, the boy's eyes fluttered open, He looked up at David, his voice barely a whisper. "Daddy?" David leaned closer, his heart leaping. "I'm here, buddy." Kai's lips curved into a small smile. "I love you." David's heart broke and healed all at once. He kissed Kai's forehead, his tears falling freely. "I love you too, Kai, more than anything." Word of Kai's condition spread through the small town, and soon, Emma and David were overwhelmed by the support that came pouring in. Neighbors brought meals, offered to help with Chloe, and some even came to the hospital to offer their prayers and support. The whispers of judgment that had once haunted their lives were now replaced with messages of hope and solidarity. David realized that they were not alone. People were capable of change, of understanding. Julia returned to the hospital a few days later with more letters and documents she had found. Records that revealed the struggles her grandfather had faced, his desire to be with his family, and the heartbreak of being kept away due to the societal prejudice of his time. As Emma read the letters, she felt a deep connection to Thomas. His love, his pain, it was all there, echoing through generations. She knew now that Kai's story was not just theirs, but a continuation of a legacy of resilience and love that had started long before them. Slowly, Kai began to recover. His strength returned, and the color came back to his cheeks. The day he was discharged from the hospital, David carried him out, tears of relief streaming down his face. Chloe walked beside them, her hand tightly in Emma's. As they stepped into the sunlight, David looked at Emma, his heart swelling with gratitude. "We did it," he whispered. Emma nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "We did." That night, back at home, the family gathered in the living room. David knelt before Chloe and Kai, his eyes serious. "I promise you both," he said, his voice steady, "that I will always be here. I will never let fear keep me from loving you, from being the father you deserve." Kai smiled, his eyes shining with trust. Chloe leaned in, hugging her father. Emma watched, her heart full. They had faced their fears, their doubts, and come out the other side. And now, they were ready to move forward, together, stronger than ever. A few weeks after Kai's recovery, the family decided it was time to take a vacation. They needed a fresh start, away from the lingering memories of hospitals and tension. Emma and David packed up the twins and drove to the coast, a place where the salty air and endless waves could wash away the remnants of their past struggles. As they arrived, Chloe and Kai's faces lit up, the sight of the ocean igniting pure joy. David and Emma watched, their hands intertwined, knowing this was exactly what their family needed. Time to heal, time to breathe. One morning, as the sun began to rise, David took Kai down to the shore. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the waves lapped gently at their feet. David knelt beside Kai, his voice filled with sincerity. "You know, Kai, you're the bravest boy I've ever known. You've been through so much, and you've always stayed strong." Kai looked up at his father, his eyes wide. "That's because I have you, Daddy." David's heart swelled with love, and he pulled Kai into a tight hug. "And you'll always have me, no matter what," he whispered, a promise renewed by the vastness of the ocean. While David and Kai were at the beach, Emma and Chloe sat on the porch of their rental house, watching the waves roll in. Chloe rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "Mom, do you think people will always ask why Kai looks different?" Emma sighed, brushing a strand of Chloe's hair behind her ear. "Maybe, sweetheart, but it doesn't matter what they ask. What matters is that we know who we are and we love each other." Chloe nodded, a small smile on her lips. "I know. I just want people to see how great Kai is." Emma hugged her daughter close. "They will, sweetheart, they will." Julia visited the family one last time before heading back home. She brought a box filled with old family keepsakes, photos, letters, and a few trinkets that had belonged to Thomas. "These belong with you," she said to Emma, her voice filled with warmth. "This is your family's story, and it deserves to be remembered." Emma took the box, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Julia, for everything." Julia smiled, hugging Emma tightly. "You're not alone. We're family, no matter where we are." As Julia left, Emma knew that the bond they had forged would last, a reminder that love and resilience could span generations. On their last evening at the beach, the family gathered around a small bonfire. David stood, clearing his throat. "I just wanted to say something," he began, his voice steady. "This past year has been the hardest of my life. I let fear and doubt get in the way of what really matters, my family. But you all stood by me, even when I didn't deserve it, and for that, I am so grateful." He looked at Emma, then at Chloe and Kai. "I promise, from now on, I'll never let anything come between us again." Emma reached out, taking his hand, her eyes shining with love. Chloe and Kai cheered, their laughter echoing against the night sky. The next morning, Chloe and Kai set out on their own adventure. They wandered down the beach, collecting seashells and chasing seagulls. As they played, they talked about their dreams. Chloe wanting to be an artist, Kai dreaming of being a firefighter. Their laughter filled the air, their bond unbreakable. They knew that no matter what the world said or thought, they had each other, and that was all that mattered. Emma sat on the sand, watching her children play. She thought about everything they had been through, the doubts, the fears, the secrets that had almost torn them apart. But as she looked at David, who was watching their children with a smile, she knew that they had come out stronger. They had faced their past, embraced it, and now they were ready to move forward. Together, they were rewriting their story, a story built on love, resilience, and hope. That afternoon, Kai approached a group of kids playing on the beach. He hesitated for a moment, then turned back to look at Chloe. She nodded, giving him an encouraging smile. Kai took a deep breath and walked over to the children. "Can I play too?" he asked, his voice small but brave. One of the boys nodded, handing him a toy shovel. "Sure." As Kai joined in, David and Emma watched, pride swelling in their hearts. Kai was finding his place in the world, one brave step at a time. On their final night, as the sun set over the horizon, Emma, David, Chloe, and Kai sat together on the sand, the waves gently lapping at their feet. Emma looked at her family, her heart full. "We've been through so much, but we made it," she said softly. David nodded, wrapping his arm around her. "And we'll keep making it, one day at a time." Chloe and Kai snuggled close, their eyes on the horizon. The future stretched out before them, filled with promise. They were a family, strong, united, and ready for whatever came next. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, resilience, and acceptance. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing it with others who might be touched by this message. And don't forget, another inspiring story is waiting for you. Just click on the video appearing on your screen now. You won't want to miss it.
More unforgettable tales are on the way here at HeroKind Stories. You'll love what's coming.